boom, boom. Hi. Okay, about 6 months ago, I woke up one morning and I had these two lines in my head that I knew were the beginning of the story. So I got up and I opened the Word document and I wrote down the lines, and then the next started coming, and the next line started coming, and the next line started coming. And so by this time, I am about halfway through a novel that is coming out differently than I've ever written anything before. And these are the opening lines. Midge didn't kill her father. She was too busy backing out of her decision to commit suicide. So, Midge comes out of this suicide attempt with a completely different perception and experience of reality. It's full of light. There's a sense that she's being befriended by this light that she can silently interact with as a voice. But as she wakes up, she's actually awakened by a phone call from her grandmother, Claire, who tells her that her father, Charles, has been found murdered in his kitchen. So she has to piece her life together and sort of deal with this wholly transformed way of experiencing reality while she is dealing with the police and the murder investigation and the whole paperwork aspect of someone you love dying. And she also has to deal with her grandmother, Claire, who has just turned 80 and is still a complete pistol. Now, her father, Charles, this is important to know, is that her father, Charles, they called him Charles in order to distinguish this sort of madman who has personality that took over from Charlie, who was quite a nice guy, who was Claire's son and Midge's dad. And Charles has been like a high-functioning lunatic, still holding down a job as a librarian. But he was convinced that Midge was trying to kill him. And he would tell anyone who would listen that his daughter was trying to kill him. And now he's been found murdered. And so Midge has been on a downward spiral since she had back-to-back betrayals by her intended fiancé and her best friend, and she sort of landed back in her hometown at the age of 32, just ahead of COVID lockdown. She's broke, out of work, and so she's had menial jobs, this crazy father, and her miserly grandmother, because Claire has a lot of money that, somebody would want to inherit if they were dead. And so something changed her mind to not commit suicide. But what I'm going to read is Midge's first visit to her father's apartment after the murder. So this is chapter 6. Charles had lived for nearly 2 decades in an apartment complex with 24 buildings, each with 3 floors that had been new and swell when Midge left for a university dorm. Thinking ahead, Charles had chosen a ground floor unit that he could enter easily as he aged. Midge steeled herself to walk into it by repeating, "This is Charles's home, and I don't know him," along with deep breaths. Time and weather and a high turnover of tenants had not been kind to this place. It had recently been sold to a private equity firm which was busily shoving tenants out so they could renovate interior and exterior. All Midge could see was rent hikes in everyone's future. It was unlikely Charles would have been able to stay here in his retirement on a fixed income. The renovations hadn't reached Charles's building yet. Midge dreaded the dark, smelly passage of stained concrete and battered walls she remembered from her final visit 2 years ago. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, what she saw at her father's door made her quicken her stride and forget the sordid odor. 2 men were peeling the police tape off the doorway and rattling a key in the lock. "Hello?" Midge said loudly. They turned and looked at her. The one closest to her wore a long tan wool overcoat, had graying hair, and the most alarming pair of blue eyes. The other man was a cop. "That's my father's apartment," Midge said still more loudly. The overcoat man turned fully towards her. He was handsome and easy in it, which wasn't going to help Midge at all here. "You must be Miss Hedgerton," he said calmly, extending his business card to her. "I am Lieutenant Detective Tom Younger of your local police department. This is Officer Tennyson." "Also of my local PD, I'm sure," Midge shot back. She shoved the card into her coat pocket and fixed them with what she hoped was a demanding look a la Claire. Tennyson's face stayed professionally blank, while the detective's eyes filled with amusement. "Yes, it is your father's apartment," the detective said, and his voice dropped with some kind of feeling. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Hedgerton. This is my first chance to look at the scene after the initial responders." Midge wasn't sure whether omitting the word murder was sincere sensitivity or an affectation. Men as handsome as Younger could be quite talented that way. Midge glanced at the police tape in Tennyson's hand and at the scuffed door, which still had stains from getting egged several Halloweens ago. All at once it struck her what she was about to do: enter the place where her daddy had been murdered. She gulped and felt cold all the way through. She was suddenly glad the two men were here, stupid as that was. "All right, let's get on with it," she growled. Being unpleasant held the possibility of actually being able to move around the apartment like a strong, intelligent person. She reached for the doorknob. Detective Younger put his hand on her wrist. "I need to go first," he said, kindly but with firmness, like you would with an unpleasant person who needed guardrails. Midge had used that tone a lot herself over the past year. She stepped back. The detective pulled blue nitrile gloves onto his hands before he lightly touched the doorknob and turned it. The cop, Tennyson, nudged Midge's arm and held out a pair of gloves to her. She took them. The detective pushed the door open and stepped in. Just one step. He put his hands on his hips, looking around. From behind Tennyson, Midge thought he looked like a new owner taking possession of a property. Her fingers clenched inside the gloves. But what could he see? Midge wondered. It was dark in there, for she remembered natural light from the abundant windows of an end unit. It must have been night when this happened, she thought. Shades were pulled, drapes drawn. The detective reached to one side and flipped the light switch. Oh dear. This really was Charles's apartment. He'd stolen it from her dad and dumped himself into it. She could see the basics of her father's home underneath the stacks and piles and rearrangements, but this was Charles's den. Midge felt a sick fury rising in her. She stood just inside the doorway. Tennyson and the detective moved around in the kitchen just to the left. "Help, please, help," she asked with strange light. "Shine with me," it replied. She stood still and took a long, slow breath, eyes wide open. "Everything is new. Everything is strange. We walk through to this place together." She exhaled and felt her feet steady underneath her. The drapes and blinds weren't drawn. Charles had nailed plywood over the windows, right over the drapes, leaving only slits at the top. Clothes and papers carpeted the floors. Food containers, plates, and cups covered the countertops and tables. Books were no longer neat on the shelves, but stacked on chairs, couches, any surface. Dad would have hated this, bolted through her like a rabbit. It was not him made this mess, but, oh God, what if inside Charles, Dad was still awake and had to watch Charles ruin everything? Midge didn't realize she was clenching her teeth in a death's head grimace, fingers clutching her coat. "This is terrible," she choked out between her jaws. She was actually vibrating. The detective stepped towards her. "If you want to wait outside—" "No!" Midge nearly shrieked. The force of it stopped her. She tipped her head back and sucked in a deep, deep breath. Let it out. Let her head return to its normal position on her neck. I need to find something of my father's." "Just be careful how you touch or move things," the detective said, watching her. And if you find something that might indicate what happened here, Tennyson added, in a matter-of-fact way that was oddly calming, let us know. Midge nodded. She didn't know what she was looking for. She'd forgotten her list, which was still in her purse. What was she looking for? Was it really any one thing? Or was she just here to witness the ruin that was Charles's life? Oh, I need to find something of my father's, if anything was left. The layout of the apartment had delighted her father. Look at these walls, he had crowed, spinning giddily in the great room. Bookshelves! Can you see the bookshelves? He hadn't moved in yet, but was showing it off to Midge, happy as a child. An empty space that would be all his whole life remade to suit his smallest taste. No more residue of the vanished Laura, who had reviled him for 4 years before finally packing up. Every corner and crevice of their modest house had soaked in her seething rage and exhaled it like old nicotine. The apartment 20 years ago was divinely clean. Gazing at it then, Midge had felt a pang that almost let her say, why couldn't we have started over like this years ago? Because immediately she knew why they hadn't. Of course they hadn't. 3 months after Laura's exit came the wreck. Grandpa and Gigi wiped out, Claire months in the hospital. Everything needed Charlie to be on deck 24/7, and Midge to stay quiet and be a good girl. After that, the years had gone on. Then Midge began remaking her own life at university, and her father was free to have some fun. As an end unit, there was a small window over the sink in the kitchen to the left of the entry, which boasted a large, solid island. 2 larger windows defined the dining and living spaces. It was the wall space between them that Charlie had claimed for his office. A marvelous antique desk would float in the center and dominate the room, backed by an equally antique dark walnut credenza and tall hutch for the most revered books and pictures. Charlie spent most of his time at home at that desk, reading or studying bills or napping like the captain of a Victorian starship. And yes, tall bookshelves were purchased and bolted to every wall, filled with gleefully diverse books from around the world. Midge drifted towards the desk. It seemed to have been the least despoiled by the years of Charles. The hutch shelves were dusty, but the framed photos were still in their positions, unmolested, as if there had been a force field around this happy place, something that Charles could not break. Midge's gaze landed on one framed picture and stayed. She smiled, remembering how this prank of a photo had pleased her father. It was the X-ray of his new hip joint, the titanium replacement he needed when he fell off his bicycle a decade back. Charlie had framed the ghostly pelvic edge himself. Midge decided this picture was what she'd come for. She moved behind the desk, lifting her hands to reach for it, and stepped on something papery. She looked down. Then she looked around at the drawers of the desk and the credenza. Officers, she called out, because she'd blanked on their names. They'd been talking in low voices in the kitchen, but quickly came to her. She pointed. The credenza drawers, especially the file drawers, were yanked out, contents strewn. Same for the desk drawers. Covering them in torn chunks were the yellow sheets of cardboard of a legal pad, ripped to bits. The detective in Tennyson stooped and picked up a few fragments of notepad. Handwriting, the detective said, just about readable. He showed a page to Midge. Is this your father's handwriting? It's worse than what it was, but yes, I would say that's my father's handwriting, Midge replied. She hadn't seen anything written by her father in almost 2 years, but the scrawls on the page did have recognizable letter shapes from Charlie's style. Was my father's death very violent? She was surprised that these words came from her mouth. The men looked at each other. Unfortunately, yes, it was very violent, Tennyson said, and Midge was glad it was his voice. Then I want to say, Midge went on, that overall, this mess in here is not violent. It's methodical. You don't see plates and mugs on the floor, just on the counters. Clothes and papers are on the floor, but not books. My father was a methodical man, consistently. This, she indicated the drawers, the strewn files, and torn pad, is violent, passionate. The detective and the cop looked at each other. The detective nodded, and Tennyson reached into his jacket for a large plastic evidence bag. Detective Younger motioned Midge out of the way. He got pictures on his phone of the drawers and the scattered notepad fragments. Tennyson waited until Younger was done, then bent to pick up the scattered shreds of notepad. Midge wondered who would get the job of piecing the torn papers together to find out what was written on them. Tennyson had to take fingerprints from the drawer pulls before Midge could get back behind the desk and retrieve the hip photo or dig around for Charlie's password books. She'd often seen her father, when sane, open one up to thumb through it, muttering in irritation. So she was reaching for memories of where he found them when Detective Younger called to her from the kitchen. "Mind coming over here?" She didn't want to see the floor, the blood, or the chalk outline of her father's body, so she fixed her gaze on the detective's face and held it there, disturbingly handsome as it was. Midge wondered fleetingly if vomiting so hard for so long had given her mild amnesia. Why the detective's handsomeness was so disturbing lingered just under some liquid surface and would not come into focus. Not yet, not yet. "Did your father like to order out for pizza?" Detective Younger asked. His blue-gloved fingers rested lightly on a small box from a popular local pizzeria, which Midge knew all too well because her car was still lightly scented with garlic-stuffed pepperoni. The top, the overfull trash can. "Well, occasionally, as far as I know," Midge answered. The detective lifted the box off the pile and set it on the counter, opened the lid slightly. "What was his usual? Mushroom and sausage?" "Mushroom and sausage it is," Younger noted. "One slice left. But," and he drew out the delivery receipt tacked to the side of the box with a sticker, "did he ever order using the name Mora?" The delivery receipt plainly showed Mora B as the customer name. "I have no idea," Midge said, wishing she could just get at the desk, find the password book, and leave. "He was nuts, you know. You could tell. Maybe he used other names to confuse people. Who knows?" "Well, here's something funny," the detective said, moving over to the sink. "This is what made me look around for a pizza box. Here, the dish drainer." He lifted up a pizza cutter, sharp wheel, clean and gleaming, which Midge recognized as something her family had owned for years, even before her mother had stormed out of the house. He held the tool by its center shaft. "The wheel is nice and clean," Younger said, "but the handle," the battered wood, once painted creamy yellow but then worn down to the grain, had reddish stains. Pale light sweeping the edge of vision. "Breathe, breathe this." Claire said his throat was slashed. Midge breathed deeply. "My grandmother said my father's throat had been slashed," she said softly, not recognizing her own voice. "Thing is," the detective said, "pizza comes sliced in the box. What's this doing out?" "My dad would have brought it out," she replied. "He always said the pizza makers never sliced all the way through. They were rushing it." The detective had an evidence bag in hand and tucked the utensil into it. "So whoever washed off the pizza slicer was rushed," he said, "and didn't wash off the handle." "Unless it's tomato sauce," Midge said. "I doubt it, Miss Hedgerton." He held her gaze with those unnerving blue eyes, and she knew it was to prevent her from looking around the kitchen, at the floor, and the spattered door of the fridge. She obliged him by looking at the overflowing trash bin. And what she spotted there, like it glowed with radium, made her gasp in a sharp breath and hold it tight. Shine and tell. Tight as a wall against a storm of memory from just before her suicide. Shine and tell. She went to the bin and plucked up the small thing with her blue-gloved fingers. Shine and tell. "What is it, Miss Hedgerton?" A voice so far away. Shine and tell. Hand sanitizer. A very small bottle, empty, its label saying care in curling romantic letters. Midge had to concentrate on breathing. In, out. Her voice came from some distant pool, plain that would not allow emotion, any emotion, to warm it or change it. The only place in town that uses this particular kind of sanitizer in this specific bottle is Grand Care, a home health care business. I worked for them for most of this past year. She held the tiny bottle out to the detective. Someone from there was here. Tennyson materialized at her side, holding a small plastic bag open. She dropped the bottle into it. She could not look at his face or the detective's face. Breathe in, out. Never mind the smell in here. Stride across the cool, dry room, ahead of any emotion. Stride across to the desk and reach for the photograph of her father's x-ray hip with its titanium joints and spiky bolts. Hold it to her chest, the glass cool and dry, her whole world glass until she could get out of there and go home. Thank you.
Wow.